I would like you to explain to me what those three pillars are that usually exist within each brand.
Do you think there would be as many women in cycling if it weren't for what Rafa did? At least partly at the time? I have the feeling that the market has become very competitive and very mature. So brands, just for survival, see that this is not enough.
Look, there's one that you suggested, but I completely agree. Bianchi is pure marketing. I don't know exactly how they're going to handle all the competition that's coming from China. I wonder what added value these brands can offer. Cyclists assume they know, but few can answer. How do you design a bicycle from scratch? It's not about painting or assembly, but how a real bike is created. When does it begin and end? Who decides what it should be, and why does it turn out that way? Let's be honest, engineers, when a brand launches a new model, we all check the frame shape, weight, and color. Behind that bike lies a complex, unseen process involving decisions, sacrifices, egos, technical compromises, internal politics, and engineering that rarely makes headlines. Today, we'll open that black box and discuss things brands rarely reveal in press releases or presentations. For instance, when a new bike launches, its successor is likely already being developed. A project might take 12, 24, or more months depending on who's leading the brand. This is where it gets interesting. Not all bikes are born the same way. Some are led by a sales department thinking about the market, while others are pushed by an engineer who wants to solve a problem you might not even know existed. And others are born because marketing needs a powerful story to sell. What happens when marketing is the one fighting the battle, or when engineering is in charge, or when everything depends on the sales department? What kind of bike comes out of each scenario? What risks does each approach have? And which brand in the industry behaves like that? Today, we're going to classify brands not to judge, but to understand their DNA. Their bikes make them feel as they do, due to or despite the technical, political, or commercial decisions behind them, since no decision is innocent. Every bike you see, whether on the mountain, road, or tracks, reflects a set of priorities. In this first DIVATIO episode, we'll discuss them all. After this episode, you'll never see a bike the same way again. And to talk about the industry's insights, what could be better than having a bike engineer who has been working with several top brands in the sector until very recently? Anton C. Anadal, welcome to Debatio podcast. Hello, Daniel Reis.
Good morning, how are you? Thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, thank you for being here with us. I'm really looking forward to diving into this content, which I think will be interesting for everyone who listens or watches on Spotify and YouTube. And before anything else, I would like to highlight how difficult it is to get access to a bicycle engineer like Anton. Until recently, after years in leading brands, Anton left the industry and is now working in a different sector. And this precisely is what gives us the chance to have him with us in a way that's completely free from corporate interests, with his personal opinion about many things in the industry. And as I was saying, this isn't so common because I have access to and contact with many engineers, but most of them depend on or work for brands, and therefore they keep them behind the curtain or only bring them out from time to time. The corporate message is very strict and they can't stray far from it. Today we have a free man with us.
Well, yes, I'm glad to be here. I hope I can share knowledge, anecdotes, or whatever comes up. But above all, so that people use this information so it helps them have a better time on the bike. Because that's what really matters in the end. And that's why we're here, whatever each person's goals may be.
Great. Well, hey, if that's okay with you, let's start with the first section that might feel a lot like an interview. Kind of like quick questions about things that, at least for me, I've wondered about many times. And not always is that information always available to the end consumer. All right, let's start with when a bike hits the market. At what point is the next one already in development? The one that will eventually replace it?
Well, it depends. I'll tell you in advance that a lot of the questions you might ask me are always going to have the answer. It depends.
I'll try to explain.
Let's see. Normally, the logic says that you should wait a few months to see how the proposal is received. And nowadays, with the market being so competitive and dynamic, with new products and new technologies constantly coming out, it's hard to think that a brand is holding something back for the next generation. So the question is, does it depend? Because there are a lot of brands and projects. But I guess the trend is to wait a few months. See how the market reacts, see how new technologies, new components, new dynamics come in, and then start over again.
But could it happen that a brand launches a new model today while an engineer was already sketching it yesterday, even if just freehand?
Yes, it could happen, yes.
Okay, how long does it really take to develop a bicycle from scratch?
Let's start truly from scratch. Sure, let's see. Many times it's like, let's see, maybe there's someone who's a programmer and is listening to us. Normally, you already start with, let's say, some templates if you want. Big brands often already have geometry templates, kinematics templates that they later modify. Or are there times when, if you start a bike from scratch, you still take some things from the previous one, and that always speeds up the project? Sorry, so if you want to go really fast, could you say that, look, 6 months to develop the 3Ds and the bikes? You hand it over to the factory if the factory has good availability. In 3 months, you have a riding sample, which is a sample you can already test, and then production is launched. We're talking about 9 to 12 months, which is really fast, especially for a bike without any possible innovations. It's basically, in quotes, just copy, modify, and paste from the previous one. If you go too fast, of course, many processes have prototyping stages, which slow down the project. But if you go really fast, just to give you an answer, 12 months, the normal is 24.
All right, all right. I understand that you have to find a balance between going fast enough. Tui verisaro on that. Not getting too caught up in the ideas you have as an engineer in being effective. And on the other hand, keeping costs under control, because I also imagine that the more molds you have, the more costs are added. But on the other hand, not going so fast that you skip phases or don't polish them all, and then the product doesn't quite fit because there was too much rush.
Let's see, again. The question is, how long does it take to make a bike? It depends, and it depends a lot on the bike, the project, the approach. I mean, there are brands that design more, everything in-house, down to the last cover and screw is owned by the brand, and there are other brands that develop less and rely more on the manufacturer. It really depends. It's typically 12 to 24 months. 12 is fast, 24 is standard, and some projects take longer.
Suppose from all you mentioned is mainly about depending more on the manufacturer, mostly Asian and open molds. I think we're going to talk a lot about this later. Let's go with another question. Do all brands more or less follow the same steps, or does each one do it their own way?
Let's see. The standard steps to develop a bike aren't very different from developing any other consumer good. There's a briefing and ideation phase to solve the problems of that bike. After that, there's development and then preparation for manufacturing, testing, and mass production. These are pretty standard steps in any product development. Do all brands follow the same steps? No, because as I mentioned before, some brands approach the factory supplier with an almost artistic, not technical sketch and say, I want this. They want the bike to have this look, target weight, and target stiffness. The factory handles development. Some other brands, as I mentioned, develop everything themselves, even to the last screw.
The brand has been more involved in projects where it handled more of the design and had greater responsibility. Therefore, the one that relies more on the manufacturer, in quotes, has less merit because the brand has done less. And two, it's unlikely that they're going to make a product that's theoretically as advanced as the brands because they've been developing everything in-house.
Yes, I mean, there are manufacturers who actually know a lot about bikes, but in the end, it's also a matter of incentives. I mean, the incentive for a brand is purely to protect their product and make it as good as possible and to imprint their DNA as much as possible. A factory's incentive is to make as many bikes as possible.
Sell, sell, sell.
Yes, the goal of a brand is also to sell bikes, but it will always be more interested in the quality of what it sells. What I'm saying is very generic, but looking at the incentives, if it has more value than a brand, it designs 100. Of course, this brand has to have the ability to make sure that what it has designed is manufactured exactly as it should be.
And when we see certain models where the new one comes out and people say, with their elbow resting on the bar, ah, but it's just like the old one. They haven't changed anything because they look a lot like each other. Is it really like that on the inside? Or maybe there's some major re-engineering going on, but we're just not able to appreciate it?
Look, there are three types of innovation: incremental, disruptive, and radical in the industry. And also, broadening the map of the bike industry a bit and thinking about development or product in general in bikes. Normally, innovations are all incremental, meaning they're an improvement over what came before, and sometimes disruptive. Radical innovations in the bike industry are rare, unless we invent something like bikes with square wheels. You know what I mean? So, if it looks like the previous one, well, hey, it takes a lot of skill to take a very mature and refined product and keep making it better, optimizing it. Are you going to make me a better product? It has to be, and usually it is a better experience for the cyclist. So,
Yes, people sometimes give more credit to something that looks different aesthetically because it seems like someone put more thought into it than not to something that looks a lot like what came before, when in reality, that probably gave the engineers more of a headache. It may look the same, but it's actually improved because it's very mature.
here I am. Let me be a bit corporate. And to the person at the bar counter saying this, tell them, hey, that's great. Also, consider these small improvements. Compare bikes from 15 years ago to now. Which one is more fun for you? And that's also been thanks to incremental improvements as well. I won't go on about this since we could do a whole podcast on the topic, but the design of a bike also plays a role. It's a dance of many factors. Many times the engineer is in charge of the frame, but there are wheels, there are drivetrains, there are suspensions, there are all kinds of components that the engineer integrates and that are also evolving. Sometimes you already have a platform that works very well. You just have to update it to adapt to these new changes. So yes, it is an incremental improvement, an incremental innovation that has a lot of value and, well, like I said, looking back over 15 years, which bikes gave you a better experience than here? I admit I'm being a bit corporate.
But you're right. I mean, especially in mountain biking, for example, you couldn't go with one, you could go with a bike 15 years ago, but with today's practices. For example, in modern cross country, with 26-inch wheels, just to say something, it would seem a bit complicated. Hey Anton, now the prototypes are so trendy with all this talk about 32-inch wheels and so on. How many prototypes can a bike have before it hits the market?
Well, a bike that's developed in 9 months? Zero prototypes. Because the prototype, no, seriously now, the prototype. Before you ask me about development times, they make them much longer. And then there are many types of prototypes. There are functional prototypes where, I don't know, maybe you make the bike out of records to test the kinematics. There are prototypes that are a 3D print of the entire frame, which you make to validate the aesthetics and the volumes, and to do assembly tests. That all the measurements fit together well and nothing collides. no part hits another. I don't know. If you're developing a plastic cover, maybe you just make a prototype of the area where that specific plastic cover is. Whether it's these openings in the down tube, or a battery cover on an electric bike, or a motor cover, or the covers that are now used for bike displays. I don't know.
Is developing a bicycle today harder than 10 or 15 years ago?
It's different. It's very different. These days, well, 15 years ago, I wasn't in the industry either, but huh? No, it's just that it's different. I imagine that 15 years ago, you didn't have as much freedom as you do now, and things were more by the book. And 15 years ago, you probably didn't have the 3D tools we have nowadays for 3D design or even simulation tools. People often wonder how weight and rigidity can both improve. Well, that's because structural simulation tools have also become available, which used to be exclusive to the aerospace industry. Defense and aerospace industries are a step above the bicycle industry. Their tools are trickling down and being commercialized elsewhere. And we end up having a solution that, just a few years ago, was something only National Aeronautics and Space Administration would use, you know?
Yeah, unattainable.
Once unattainable, they are now available commercially and we can use them. 15 years ago, it was just as hard or easy, it was the same, it was just different. I mean, the difficulty was the same, just with different ingredients to cook with.
Yes, maybe now you have better, more advanced tools, but you also want to go further because the materials too, the tools themselves let you create things that are more technologically advanced, lighter, more rigid, more shapes, more difficult.
For example, SRAM was a mechanical company 15 years ago. In 2025 and previously, it's an electromechanical company.
Of course,
It will offer better tools, but complexity has also increased.
exactly, it's different.
It's different.
Super good example. And tying this a little bit with the independence from engineers to be able to develop and all that, I'd like you to explain to me what those three pillars are that usually exist within each brand. And depending on the type of company, one is stronger than the other. In the end, this leads the bicycles toward one design, another, or a certain functionality, or whatever it may be. I mean, I'm talking about the three classic areas of marketing: product, which would be engineering, and then there would be sales, and that central figure who can pivot to one side or the other of the product manager. And I'm not sure if I should say he's above the engineers or if he's the one who controls or gives directions to the engineers. You'll explain this, but what is that balance? Once you explain, it should give us a good starting point so that later we can, in quotes, classify the brands depending on whether sales, marketing, or engineering has more influence within a brand.
Yeah, well, this isn't scientific, but it's true that talking with you and based on what we've discussed over this time, there's a mental framework that really helps to understand the types of brands that exist and then to understand when someone says no. This brand imprints DNA on its bicycles in one way or another, understanding how the DNA gets from people to a bike. And I'm rambling, I'll get to the point. I think that in general, and the bigger a brand is, the less you can see it. But in general, brands are led by three departments. There's one department that takes the lead and has more power over the others.
Whether it's
There are brands where the commercial product manager is the one in charge. There are brands where the engineers are in charge. And there are brands where marketing, or if you don't want to call it marketing, the general idea of the business model is who is in charge, so it depends on who is leading one company or another. Will it imprint the DNA on the bikes in one way or another? This may also cause users to respond, I don't know why. How should I know? I'm really into Cannondale, or I'm really into Specialized, I'm really into Scott, or whatever. Because let's say this DNA of the brand's leadership, it gets imprinted in a way on the products that makes users, in their own way, have more affinity for one or the other. This isn't scientific, but it provides a framework to help you navigate, to understand the types of companies out there, the types of products, and to get a bit more insight. I gave a really abstract speech, but well, I hope.
But I think it lays the groundwork if we get specific, of course, not now, but so we can get specific later. I don't know if that sounds good to you. We can start mentioning brands and people will start putting a face to what we're talking about. I think one way to start might be with the ones where the sales department has more influence. And I can think of some. I don't know if you'll agree with me because even here we might not have the same opinion. Sometimes how brands are seen externally is very different from their internal reality, right? But anyway, I'm going to show you some little things I have prepared here. For example, there are several brands in Spain, and I'm showing you one of them. The case is Colwer, which for me clearly has to do with a model, with the fact that a figure like sales carries much more weight. I'm not sure what I did. I left the website, but now I'm here. Why do I say this? Because it's often easy to see in these kinds of brands. I'll give more examples now. Well, we're almost always talking about models that are open mold. I don't know if Anton can explain to everyone what an open mold is. What is an open mold?
Yes, an open mold is when you don't develop a mold. Manufacturers often have their own bike catalog and buy it, and any brand can go and buy it. So the mold then, open mold, does that mean that the bike mold is open so that any brand can go and buy it? They put their brand, their paint, their specs on it and sell it. And there are cases like that too. You don't see it as much anymore. Brands that had exactly the same frame, just with different paint and a logo.
You don't see that as much anymore.
But it used to happen a lot.
Yes, actually, I gave the example of Colwer first in the case of the mountain one because, well, if you know a bit about mountain bike models, this particular model will remind you of another very important brand in its previous version, previous generation. As far as I know, what they did, the manufacturers did was make agreements with bike brands to, depending on how many units you buy from me, I can guarantee you more or less exclusivity. If you don't reach a minimum number of units, for example, let's say if you don't buy 1,000 units from me, up to 1,000 units, I can sell your painting to anyone in the world, including your neighbor from the same town. So what you said would happen. Two brands from the same country have identical paintings, only the logos differ. I'll keep giving examples. If you reach 2,000 units, you'll get exclusivity in your country. As the manufacturer, I won't produce it for anyone else in Spain, for instance. So that's where the situation comes in, where brands had the same model in Spain and Italy, just with a different logo. And if you reach 5,000 units, I'll give you exclusivity in Europe. Then the Spanish brand used the same frame as Indonesia's, just to give you an example. But if you reach 10,000, you get total exclusivity for this open mall, and I won't sell it to anyone else at all.
And you pretended.
If you reach those amounts, that investment capacity as a brand, that space was yours, because of course no one else had it, but in reality it was an open mall.
Yes, and going back to the topic of brand profiles, a brand led by a commercial bar product manager has this mindset completely. In fact, sometimes you start with an open mall and make small modifications to it. This bike, you change the head tube angle, you put on a universal derailleur hanger, and you add a post mount for a bigger disc or things like that, or instead of a press fit, you give me a threaded bottom bracket. Small modifications, or the seat post diameter is one size and not another. Do they make these modifications from an open? And when we talk about DNA, now we're getting specific. These kinds of brands are clearly led by a commercial profile that sees a market need, identifies a target user, and sets a price. They go for it, so design and development will likely do their jobs. No, just because it's an open mall doesn't mean it has to be lower quality. there are open malls with good quality. And it's also great that brands like this exist because there are people who are looking for this type of bike at this price. And we're back to the beginning of the podcast. The idea is that everyone finds the product that will let them enjoy their weekends or whenever they go biking. If the product comes through an open mall, that's great.
It's great that it's that way.
These brands have to exist, they have their audience, and it's not easy for a product manager to create a good product starting from an open mall. I mean, it's also a challenge
For those who are.
leading this brand.
And let's not just think about the usual, about competitive bikes with the minimum possible weight and so on. Let's think about recreational bikes. Let's think about bikes for kids. I mean, a lot of those bikes are sold and they also have to be there. And many times it doesn't make sense. Hey, special. There you can afford the luxury of designing a balance bike for practically babies, made of carbon with its own shapes and it's. But anyway, to begin with, I don't know if that bike cost 500 euros, I think, but it's more like
That bike was developed so that Boston Dynamics could put a robot on top of it. Ah, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I don't know if you've seen the video.
yeah, I've seen it, but well.
No. But just to add one thing, for example, what you say about kids' bikes, those are bikes that are really led by a salesperson. And it makes sense for it to be that way.
If it has baskets, if it doesn't have baskets, if it has four wheels that can be attached or removed or not, or of course, there.
At the development level, there's not much you can do.
That's it.
It's in quotes, and now I'm going to say something kind of obvious, but everything has already been invented for a kid's bike. It's really just about the color, the proportions, the specs, the price.
100. I have a few more examples since I already looked them up. I think I'm going to put them here, which are from what we can categorize, I believe, as this type of bikes. I mean, one, for example, would be Mendes, which is a slightly different story because it's true that Mendes has a lot of tradition. It's a brand, if I'm not mistaken, from Victoria from many years ago. But well, at a certain point, it almost completely disappeared or disappeared entirely. And since it came back, well, it's become a bit of a rival to Colwer. Do we have Mendes as another option? If you don't agree with something I'm saying, just let me know, no problem.
Right? But, and it also occurs to me while you look for the other example to highlight these brands. Many times, these brands are the entry point for new people into our sport, and this is super important for it to keep growing and developing. Still, someone who gets into the sport might feel more comfortable with a corner bike, like the one you have on screen, instead of going straight to a specialized that they already sell you. A message that's meant for more experienced people
You know?
or at a higher level than before. You actually have an excellent bike with great features, perfect for starting the sport. I hope this sector continues to grow and develop.
Actually, let me share an example from my experience. My first mountain bike was an aluminum Kona. I remember perfectly. It came with the whole drivetrain, brakes, XT was aluminum, and so on. It cost me 600 euros back then, many years ago. The next bike I gave my brother, which was his first mountain bike, was a Kona.
I had a bike with Connor as a kid too.
Of course, my first high level competition bike, 26 inches, still a hardtail with V brakes and all, was a Kona. A WRC 3 used to cost 3,000 euros for the top model, while the Specialized was 6,000 and the Orbea Alma was 5,500. At the shop where I did my mechanic internship, they had all three. The first bike I gave my father so he could go for a ride. I don't know, it was aluminum. A Kona, I mean, it holds a place that is the one that.
I was talking about, for a lot of people listening to us, their first bike was probably a BH California BH. Until not too long ago, I also had this exact perspective.
Exactly. Now then, I see two ways of looking at this. Well, one way of looking at it, especially looking ahead, and it's this kind of brands, I'm not exactly sure. Their main battle is ultimately over price. I'm not sure how they'll handle all the competition from China. They have an established commercial network in every country they operate, including these three and Spain. But if Chinese brands really manage to come in and fight hard on price, I don't know what other added value these brands will be able to offer.
I don't know. Now they'll be the ones who have to respond, but many of them are probably counting on what you've mentioned, with a pretty strong commercial network and a lot of local presence.
But well, that's 100% certain, and then there are others. Well, as you said, there are a few brands. In fact, there are many examples of national brands that started this way with open molds. I think Mondraker and Beria are examples of this. Now I'll show images of starting with those open molds. But at a certain point, they gain traction, can afford to move up to other levels and start developing their own product. And here's an anecdote, quite an interesting case. I don't know if you ever heard about the joint development at the time. For example, Beria came with their Mako model, which is Beria's classic full suspension bike. The brand from Villa Robledo, Albacete, which was apparently an open mold, but at a certain point they decided to, because the owners of Beria have a background in Switzerland and have many acquaintances and friends in Switzerland, and having a relationship with the people from the Tomus brand, which is a brand that is very active in the German speaking market, Austria, Switzerland, Germany. And since they had a brand that was predominantly in Spain, Latin America, a bit in Italy, and so on, let's say these are two markets that didn't overlap with each other. And with that friendship, they decided to form a partnership and jointly develop what would be the next cross country full suspension bike for both brands. Because in this way, two small brands that until then could only afford to work with open molds, they took a leap forward and didn't step on each other's toes because they were in different markets. That's how the Mako was created with its vertical shock absorber. What happened next? Many people saw the Mako, the Thomas competing in the World Cup. It was exactly the same bike, but with a different logo than the Beria that had been introduced here in Spain. And they said it was an open mold, but actually it was a joint development. It's not the same thing.
It's not the same. I knew it was the same platform, but I wasn't aware of this development. If you'd asked me 10 minutes ago, I would have thought it was an open mold.
Exactly. And I think the brands, let's see, for me, for example, at that time I was working for Beria, and I argued that for Beria, I considered them as clients, let's say, and I argued that this needed to be explained. But I think the brands fell short when it came to explaining that it should have been explained better, you know? If I had been part of the marketing team of any of the brands, would I have defended that proposal? Because suddenly it's something where you're making a very important and very decisive leap. In the short history of those two brands, could you give the perception of the exact opposite, that you were still in the open mold phase?
Is that so? Is that so? I didn't know. The story is very interesting.
Well, if you sit down to talk with Jose from Beria, he can tell you 1,001 stories, and they're all super interesting. But, well, I wanted to use this as the path of brands. Unlike Connor or Culver, at a certain point, they have actually said, I want to take it up a notch. I want to have my own development. Beria used that and also relied on Thomas between the two. But there are others, like, for example, Mondraker, or as you mentioned a long time ago. I'm not sure if BH ever used open molds, but these brands have progressed by developing their own products and brand identity. With Mondraker, it's clear, and increasingly so with BH.
Yes, and what you said as well. These three classifications I made for myself are never truly clear cut. And then that the bigger the brand is, the more, I think you said it before, the more they work together as a whole. So, yes, yes. When a brand is born, it's very easy to see who's in charge of that brand. But as it grows, all the departments and personalities that can lead a project have to work in a more symphonic way.
Well, actually, when I went to visit Vita and BH for the first time, they told me, well, here is the office. of the mountain bike engineer, and here at this computer works the road and gravel bike engineer. And I was just like, wow. I've seen brands that by perception would seem bigger and don't have this. They work with external studios or rely on the manufacturer. And there in Vitoria, they have a guy 100% dedicated 365 days a year to thinking about how the future mountain bikes should be.
Totally looks and tests. It's just that in cross country, they're very confident in their kinematic system and they haven't fallen for the flex pivot trend. And to make this decision, you can tell there's a developer who knows exactly what he's doing.
And are you talking about the split pivot?
I'm clearly talking about the BH split pivot, yes.
Please never fall into that temptation. I mean, for being one of the few that still use slightly more complex systems, please, yes.
Please.
Well, and then,
If we talk about kinematics, I'll say a few bad things about him, just a little.
yes.
About the bending in the tie rods.
Okay, no.
Poor headline, I won't speak negatively, but let's discuss tie rod bending.
Do you mean yes for these bikes?
Cross country ones, yes.
Okay. Great. And then on the other hand, we have Mondraker, which of course Mondraker actually as a company it was born as a distributor. It was Team Bike, which to this day still handles SRAM and many top brands, but it was a distributor. At some point they chose to make their own bikes.
I'm remembering when I mentioned earlier that in the past you would see two identical models with different brands. I remember the Mondraker Patrol, there was exactly the same Massey and on exactly the same frame, one painted blue as Mondraker, another grey. I remember, look, it's the case of a distributor brand with a completely commercial leadership focus. I don't think there were many engineers at the brand at that time anymore.
Later developing their own things. You can recognize a Mondraker even without paint on the frame 100% exactly.
Totally, not just because of technology, but because of brand identity and shapes.
And then I think there are two other national brands that are right now trying to make that leap. More and more developing their own product, more and more having their own brand DNA, adding a lot of value. I think we could talk about Megamo and we could talk about MMR. What do you think?
Yes. Well, MMR has already been not doing its own developments for some time.
Yes.
And Megamo too, absolutely. I have the feeling that the market has become very competitive and very mature, and people already have an eye for open malls. I don't know how to say it. So the brands now almost for survival that before had more of a development focus. Commercially, with minimal development on their part, do you see this as insufficient? So yes, Megamoman has recently been taking a step forward in this regard, developing his own product. So if you're two, what did you say? They're heading in the direction of growing, eventually becoming more mature brands, growing, and in this way, yes.
And if we're going to talk about the big ones, do you dare to take a stand?
You start.
I'll start. Let's see. Look, there's one that you suggested, but I completely agree with it. Bianchi Pure Marketing.
Yes, it's a company where you can see that, for example, even in the shapes of the frame, they're shapes designed to create a sense of brand identity, not necessarily optimization and performance, for example.
Yeah.
And this is a very marketing driven way of developing. Well, this case you see on the screen is, yes, well,
And also a marketing approach, moreover, very concrete and very focused on what would be the brand's heritage. Not every time a Bianchi comes out, you get a Pantani sooner or later. I don't mean just the color, also the sky blue, this very one.
this blue that has been shown on screen.
Yes.
I don't know how much these volumes have been developed. Someone from Bianchi might dislike me for saying this, but I'm honestly unsure. It's an exercise in optimization and more like, for example, a brand brands when a car brand tries to design a bike. It's very obvious that it's done from a marketing perspective because it's done from a communicative speech, not from actually meeting real needs or optimizing for a specific type of riding.
It's more like a concept bike, right? In cars, a concept car usually isn't produced. Maybe bikes are, but it's mainly about the idea. Something really well thought out. Let's not say yes.
Even worse than a concept bike is just a purely stylistic exercise.
We're talking about Italy, man.
Yeah, there are good Italian brands just so people don't get the wrong idea. For example, these cranks you see in the picture are a work of craftsmanship.
The claviculars.
It's not Italian, but I think they're Italian. I hope I'm not mistaken.
I would say yes, but not right now, no, well.
Maybe now in the comments they're going to crucify me, right? Saying this brand isn't Italian? Well, I don't know.
Well, but let's see. I mean, I think Bianchi is totally Italian. I mean, I've lived in Italy. I've had an Italian girlfriend. We could go to a cobblestone street where she would walk in heels, you know? Well, this is the perfect example. I mean, it's that philosophy of aesthetics, of the physical, let's say, taken to its very essence, but in bike version.
That's right. But hey, look, I want to suggest a brand, let's see, in terms of marketing, which has a very marketing focused approach, but from a positive point of view. It's not about bikes, it's about clothing. The brand is Rafael. It's a brand that, if you look at its history, was started by people who came from marketing agencies. But for me, it's a brand that's part of cycling history, which has completely changed the concept of cycling. And I'll explain why, but first with a headline. Do you think there would be so many women in cycling if it weren't for it? For it? Because of what Rafa did, partly at the time. What did Rafa do? He made a shift in the cycling industry's mindset from focus racing to focus lifestyle. And a big part of this change was about experience, about living the sport. It was thanks to a brand like Rafa, even back then, a brand that was born from pure and hard marketing. Because obviously, I understand that later they make sure to have quality and so on and so on. But the introduction is cycling. It's not just about winning races, it's lifestyle. It's discovering new landscapes. It's the coffee ride. It's good. So many other things that later in this way of living cycling have exploded. With gravel, which was largely led by brands like Rafa.
I mean,
From a marketing focus point, it's not always negative. I think you can change the experience of the sport for the better to bring in new people. As I said, just to provoke without the change of focus that Rafa made, would there be so many women in cycling?
look, you go to the website and the first four photos on the homepage are women, look, woman, 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 woman. We take it for granted, but this was unusual just days ago.
And this is good for sports.
Of course, very good. Hey, and Canyon, how would you categorize her? All right, let's see if we agree there. Yes, yes.
For me, Canyon, let's see. It's just that when brands grow, they become global brands. They're not just from one place anymore, but their origin is marketing. Business model bar, okay.
I mean,
Canyon appeared with the boom of e commerce, and that's like their big breakthrough. It's selling bikes online. So, maybe not from the marketing side, but definitely from the business model side. That's where I would classify it.
look, it's no coincidence they're launching helmets, clothing, and shoes. It's a pure e-commerce business. In fact, there's no other way to buy a Canyon, not even at their physical locations, unless it's through the website.
Yes.
Then other topics related to technology or developments have come up, for example. I remember when they first released the cyclocross one, they made the top bar. Let me see if I can find it around here. They made the top bar a bit higher, so the rider's shoulder fits when they have to get off the bike. Things that make you go, wow, that makes a lot of sense, you know?
At the product level, they've been bold. Remember the gravel bike with the double height handlebar? Can't recall the name, sorry.
Yeah, the Grail, the first Grail.
The first Grail. Well, later on, they've also worked on the product level, but of course, yes, if we start from the beginning. As we said, when a brand is born, you see its true colors.
And of course,
Obviously, it keeps developing so it doesn't get left behind. But I remember the first Canyon bikes were such a good price that people would buy them. They put all the components on their chosen bike, which ended up costing them less.
well, this has also happened with Decathlon many times with the offers they had and so on. And I think that right after that moment you had with Canyon, they realized they needed to have marketing that was more focused on engineering, on we developed our own bikes, and that's when they started putting numbers all over the frame and components, you know. And they also started giving the bikes more technical names, and that's when and then finally real technical development also came along, but there was like an initial marketing push to say that we're not Decathlon, that we have bikes at very good prices, but that's because we're cutting out the middlemen, not because our bikes lack that added engineering value.
Yes, yes.
And for example, I think we can put these three in the same group: BMC Cannondale and Mondraker, which we've already talked about. Even though they're big, like you said, it's hard to tell one area from another. But even though they're big, I think they're very much led by engineers.
Yes, totally, totally. This is evident when a brand like BMC with the auto drop has its own technology.
This,
It's a brand led by engineers, and if it's not led by engineers, they are a pillar of the brand. Same with BMC. I don't know how things work internally, but maybe they have good product managers who need to work closely with engineers. And totally, you see? We've mentioned brands led by marketing, bar, business plan, and these are clearly brands where there's a very strong emphasis on engineering development.
I'm checking out Four Stroke's new model for this year, and wow, all bold with that gradient logo in warm colors. Wow, I just got really excited.
Right? It's really beautiful.
For example,
Look at BMC earlier, we were talking about the trend in cross country bikes that they've all moved on from the single pivot design. With flex in the seat stays, BMC continues with its virtual pivot suspension system with the two linkages.
correct?
And do you see it? For example, another detail, the solutions they've made for the shock absorber, the mount, yes, the upper mount.
It is.
A separate piece. Well, with this, I don't mean that it's better or worse, it will have its reasons. But do you see details that show someone has been making decisions that aren't the usual ones made in the market?
Yes, yes.
I don't get involved. Whether this setup is better or worse, it's their own. It's someone leading, exactly.
Look at this example in Cannondale. For example, this new urban bike, Flying V. Man, if you look at that frame, you say this doesn't look like an urban bike, you know?
Is this bike really cool?
Or let's not even talk about the lefty. I mean, in a world like today where people are looking for like uniformity, right? I mean, everyone wants either the RockShox fork or the Fox, the Kashima, that kind of thing. And suddenly, Cannondale is still there, sticking to its guns. With the whole lefty thing, you know?
Or
The
the flexing issue in the chainstay. How would you say chainstay in Spanish, Danny? The lower stay. The lower stay is a system that flexes the carbon, but it flexes in a way that no other does, at a very specific point, to emulate a horsling. Now I'm saying a lot of words, but anyway.
well, this finite part here that I'm focusing on now, this
The flexion of the carbon is usually done in flex pivot systems. It's done in the upper stay, and here they do it concentrated in the lower part, emulating the horsling system. As if there were a bearing here.
Of course.
I'm not going to get into this topic again in this podcast episode, whether it's better or worse, and go deep into it, but it is different. Things are clear, there's someone making decisions exactly and saying we're going this way, so that's why it's a brand where the engineer or the developer or the figure who is the product manager, I mean, it can be a bit abstract from the brands, it's unique.
And this one, what do you say? The UF.
I mean, there's an engineer behind this. I mean, this is a brand led by the developer.
It's an engineer without oversight, no sales or marketing to counterbalance or advise him.
The wheel clearance of this bike, I've checked it out a lot because it's interesting. It's 2.6.
I'm just telling you this.
A cross country bike. I mean, there are people making very personal decisions in this brand. Yes.
Yes, it's very personal. It's a little known Icelandic brand, and the 2.6 is probably for riding over snow. But anyway, there you have the fork with fiberglass rods that allow it. I don't remember if it was, I think it was up to 30 millimeters of flex. Well, you took it well.
Right, this bike?
Yes, yes. Also, it's like I kept one, like I bought one. So, but anyway, you can clearly see, look at the role model. It's obvious that here the product guy goes a bit crazy and nobody stops him. And I think it's great that there are still brands like that.
Yes, they have to exist because there are people who have a technical background who want to understand in a technical way what they're buying. This brand explains it and they relate to it. That's what they want.
100. And Anton, do you think we can put Van Rissel, Scott, Specialized, and Trek in the same category, considering how big they are and how well developed they are? But do you think we can put them in the category of what would be strict, pure product management? Thinking about finding a lot in sales, about how to make the most of the space they want to occupy with each model, but without neglecting a minimum of innovation, a minimum of development, aesthetic differentiation, and so on.
It's just that these brands can't be put in that category anymore because they're already so big. The same goes for Van Rissel since it's something newer, and it's something newer, maybe it's still yet to be seen. But these three you've mentioned, Specialized, Trek, and Scott, they're complete brands, right? For example, Scott, could someone have put it on the same level as BMC and Mondrecker as being led by engineers? And actually, for me, it's more about the product manager, but, well, being such a global brand, that's just how they are now. These roles are blurred since they likely work together in those companies. But why do I say Scott? Obviously, it's because of the technology, for example, the shock absorber inside the frame. There was probably a product manager who wanted this and went to the market to buy a patent.
He bought it from the Swiss neighbors.
Exactly. And this is, for this specific case, a way of thinking of a product manager. Very sharp, very sharp.
Very effective at making decisions.
Very much so. Yes, 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 and very brave. Specialized, which is a brand of engineers, of product managers, of communication. It's everything. It's a global brand. When they release a bike, you can be sure it's good. I'm telling you, it's a symphonic exercise between departments and it couldn't be any other way. That's also what makes them great, right? I mean, being at the highest level in every aspect of development. And this necessarily has to have a correlation with what happens inside.
Yes, but Specialized, for example, is at the same time the top marketing brand in the world of bikes. But they can't afford to sell even a bit of hype because it's the most scrutinized brand. When they release something new, everyone compares themselves to it. Not long ago, we were in Taiwan covering the launch of the Giant Anthem, and the walls were full of our bike. Does this compare to, or I don't know? The flex of the new Anthem's seat stays is 5 millimeters, while the Epic 8 is 4.5 millimeters. The reference is always present. I use Giant as an example, but many brands compare to the Tarmac, Epic 8, or Turbo Levo. So there's a lot of marketing around Specialized, but there's also They have to be very precise because it can't be just hype. The marketing has to be real.
It's not just that it's great, it's that Specialized is a totem among current brands. So it's the same. This classification we use to navigate a bit and understand what DNA bikes have in brands like Specialized is now much more blurred. This analysis loses its meaning.
Yeah, yeah. Because topics like, I don't know if they've discontinued it, I haven't seen it again, so let's see. The Diverge suspension travel, rear the gravel bike with full suspension that they released, which apparently hasn't done very well in terms of sales. In fact, I'm not finding it. Yes, we have the numbers
On the fork?
on the fork. Well, they do keep that system on the current Diverge, but the STR had a system. Ah,
Yes, yes, yes.
and he hasn't worked well in terms of sales then. I mean, isn't it because they didn't push it enough in marketing at the time with promotional videos and all that? But they took a risk, let's say, in terms of the concept, they really took a big risk. They're,
Of course, just imagine, I don't know if I could. How can I help people understand and use that Diverge system you mentioned? The necessary development?
of course,
Because also, being specialized, you can't just release a prototype, you have to develop something completely new and make it ready for mass production.
I mean,
It's a big deal, you know? It must be tough when a small brand tries this development and it doesn't work out.
it goes under to be exact, exactly. I mean,
That's why it's a lot of marketing. But with this little detail we just explained, or with the brain in its time, it shows the development and engineering capability behind these big brands.
Trek, I think we can put it there as well, right? Maybe I see it as a bit more conservative when it comes to launching products.
But you just launched a full suspension gravel bike, despite being conservative. And for being conservative, it has its own system. This is the IsoStrat.
Yes.
They are already big brands that can go talk to RockShox and have custom suspensions made for their bikes. That's already another league.
Yeah. But the thing about full suspension on gravel bikes, we're going back a bit to what Alaf does within Trek, where everything is super measured and super clear. It feels like this full suspension on gravel bikes is like, I'm not sure. It's a signature thing, very much an engineer's project, something someone was permitted to do, right?
Maybe it's just a trial balloon, but the thing is, only big brands can afford to do this kind of thing. And apparently, it's actually quite successful on this bike.
Well, this bike, as far as I know, was only going to be released in the North American market. It wasn't going to come out in Europe because they didn't trust it. And now I don't know why this has come up. And finally, they decided to release it in Europe. And it seems to be doing very well in terms of sales. I think so too. Gravel bikes are ideal for ultra distance adventures, unlike models like the Checkmate, which are better for racing. It's helping, but let's see. It's a creation in the good sense of the word, in the sense that the engineer was given free rein to do whatever he wanted.
This project is really well done, honestly, because it makes a very specific statement at a very specific moment. And it goes straight to the heart of what people are wondering about, which is gravel in a way that makes you think, and it's really great. I mean, I've said a very generic phrase, but it goes to what the moment demands from gravel's speech about what gravel is, where it's going. And he makes a very clear statement right there in the middle. It moves trends, it moves user experiences, it moves things. This Bible is really well put together.
For me, it's really good. Well, taking the clear example, this one hasn't had enough time on the market for other brands to react to this type, to replicate this Trek launch. But if we look at the Super Caliber came out, and right after that, the Specialized World Cup came out with, well, I don't know if I should say it was a copy, but it was a very similar concept. Right after that, BT Lynx SLS. Then we saw the first one. So in this sense, Trek is also one of the most followed brands, or at least a trendsetter.
Yes, a big one. Trek is a big one and like specialized. And so with these big ones, the rankings we make don't really make sense anymore. And you have to look at each case individually and follow them as unique creatures. So they set the trends.
All right, well, I don't know. Antonio, I think we've given a pretty interesting overview of everything that goes into designing a bicycle. If that's all right with you, we'll keep having you on for future podcasts since I already have some new ideas lined up. Thank you very much for sharing everything you've brought us today.
Thank you very much to you. I'm more used to being behind the screen than in front of a microphone, so yeah. It's also a learning experience for me, and I hope to keep improving and bringing value to the audience.
Great. Well, then, I'm going to ask the audience, please, to hit the follow button wherever they're watching us on Spotify or YouTube because we're starting this project from scratch. So, the more you can support us, the better. And feel free to leave absolutely any comment you want about your bike, whether you agree with us or not, about the brands we've mentioned and how we've ranked them. And above all, we'll see you in the next episodes. So, that's it. Be very happy. Bye bye.